For decades, the British monarchy has mastered the art of silence. But what happens when that silence is broken by the king himself? In a revelation that has stunned insiders and shaken royal watchers to their core, King Charles has finally spoken about Prince Philip's final wish. But this wasn't just a farewell message. It was a demand one that could rewrite the monarchy's future forever. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For years, the palace has operated behind an impenetrable veil, where truths are softened, statements are measured, and anything that threatens stability is quietly buried. But something has shifted. Something powerful enough to force King Charles to step beyond that carefully guarded silence. And when he did, it wasn't with the calm restraint expected of a monarch, it was with a weight that could be felt in every word. As though he wasn't just revealing a memory, but unlocking something long contained. Because this wasn't simply about grief. This wasn't just about honoring a father. It was about confronting something that had been deliberately hidden. Prince Philip's passing was presented to the world as a dignified farewell to a steadfast royal figure. But beneath that polished narrative was a deeper emotional current, one that those closest to the family understood all too well. His death didn't just leave a void. It left unanswered questions, conversations unfinished, and perhaps most unsettling of all, it left behind a final wish that was never meant to remain silent forever. There had always been whispers, subtle, persistent, almost impossible to trace, suggesting that Philip's last words carried more weight than anyone was willing to admit. And then came Charles' revelation. Not in the immediate aftermath, not in the expected window of mourning, but delayed, calculated, almost as if the timing itself carried meaning. Why now? Why reveal something so significant after years of restraint? Those questions alone were enough to send ripples through royal circles. But it was what he revealed, or rather, how he revealed it, that truly unsettled those paying close attention. Because between the carefully chosen phrases and the pauses that lingered just a moment too long, there were hints of something deeper, something controversial, something that didn't align with the monarchy's carefully preserved image. Inside the palace, the reaction was anything but composed. While the public received a controlled version of events, insiders reportedly found themselves grappling with the implications. Meetings held behind closed doors, urgent discussions about what this meant moving forward. Because the official statement told one story, but the underlying message told another entirely. And those who understood the difference knew immediately that this wasn't just a revelation. It was a disruption. There were already signs, small but undeniable, that unity within the monarchy was beginning to fracture. Not openly, not yet, but in subtle ways. In the shifting tone of appearances. In the silence where there should have been clarity. Because if Philip's final wish truly carried the weight Charles suggested, then fulfilling it wouldn't be simple. It would require choices. Difficult ones. And not everyone would agree on which path to take. And perhaps the most chilling realization of all was this wasn't just a wish. It was a warning, a final act from a man who had spent a lifetime observing the institution from both inside and out. A message not just to his son, but to the monarchy itself. And now that it had been revealed, there was no going back. Because once a truth like this is spoken aloud, it begins to take on a life of its own, unraveling everything in its path. But to understand why this final wish carries such explosive power, we must go back to the man behind the crown, Prince Philip himself. Prince Philip was never meant to fit neatly into the royal mold, and perhaps that's exactly why his final wish carries such unsettling weight. Behind the sharp wit and stoic demeanor was a man who challenged tradition at every turn. But what few knew was that in his final years, Philip was quietly preparing something that would outlast him and possibly shake the monarchy to its core. From the very beginning, Philip stood apart not just in personality but in perspective. He entered the royal world not as someone shaped by its rigid expectations, but as someone who constantly questioned them. Where others accepted tradition without hesitation, Philip pushed against it, sometimes subtly, sometimes with unmistakable force. It made him difficult to predict, even harder to control. And over time, that tension became part of his identity, a man bound to the monarchy, yet never entirely defined by it. He was often described as blunt, even controversial, but that bluntness carried something deeper. It wasn't recklessness, it was conviction. Philip saw things others chose to ignore, and he spoke about them in ways that made people uncomfortable. Palace protocol demanded diplomacy, but Philip rarely disguised his thoughts behind polished language. That trait, admired by some and feared by others, meant he was always walking a line too honest for tradition, too essential to be dismissed. Privately, those closest to him began to notice a shift as the years went on. Beneath the familiar sharpness was a growing frustration. Not loud, not explosive, but persistent. The monarchy, in his eyes, was changing and not in the way he believed it should. There were moments when he would withdraw from public life, not out of weakness, but out of choice. And in that distance, something began to form. Reflection turned into concern. Concern turned into intention. In those later years, Philip became more selective about who he spoke to and what he shared. Conversations were no longer casual, they carried weight. Especially with Charles. Their relationship had always been complex, layered with both tension and respect, but something shifted as time narrowed. Reports suggest that these conversations became more frequent, more focused, almost as if Philip was preparing Charles for something he couldn't leave unsaid. There were no public signs of this preparation, no official acknowledgement. But within those private exchanges, there were hints, carefully chosen words, pointed observations, subtle warnings. Philip wasn't just reflecting on the past. He was questioning the future. And more importantly, he was questioning whether the monarchy was still aligned with what it was meant to represent. The idea that it might be losing its identity lingered heavily in those discussions. What makes this even more striking is the growing belief that Philip's final wish wasn't something decided in a single moment. It wasn't spontaneous. It was shaped over years, refined through experience, frustration, and quiet observation. Every conflict, every disagreement, every moment of doubt may have contributed to what he ultimately chose to leave behind. And now, looking back, those years of silence feel less like absence and more like preparation. As if Philip, in his own way, was stepping back not to disappear, but to think, to plan, and to ensure that when his voice was finally heard, it would be impossible to ignore. And as Philip's health began to fade, those quiet reflections turned into something far more deliberate and far more urgent. In the final days of Prince Philip's life, the world saw only silence, but behind closed doors, something extraordinary was unfolding. Conversations were held in whispers, documents allegedly prepared, and one final message carefully shaped. What was said during those final moments has remained hidden until now. And what King Charles has revealed suggests that Philip wasn't just saying goodbye, he was setting something into motion. To the public, those final days were framed with calm dignity, a carefully managed narrative of quiet decline and respectful distance. Updates were brief, controlled, almost deliberately restrained. It was the kind of silence the monarchy had perfected, offering just enough to satisfy curiosity, while shielding everything that truly mattered. But behind that controlled exterior, there were signs that something far more significant was taking place. Not chaotic, not dramatic in the obvious sense, but deliberate, quietly intense. The kind of tension that doesn't announce itself, yet changes everything. Access to Philip became increasingly restricted, and not in the usual way expected during a sensitive moment. There was a selectiveness that raised questions. Who was allowed in, and more importantly, who wasn't? Familiar faces were kept at a distance, while certain meetings were permitted under conditions that suggested urgency rather than routine. And at the center of it all was Charles, not as a distant heir waiting for the inevitable, but as someone being drawn closer, repeatedly, as if something needed to be said and understood. Those conversations, whatever they contained, were not fleeting exchanges. They stretched longer than expected, deeper than anyone anticipated. There was an emotional weight to them that lingered beyond the walls where they took place. It wasn't just a father speaking to his son, it felt more like a transfer of something intangible, something that couldn't be written into official statements or captured in ceremonial tradition. And yet there are whispers that something was written or recorded, a message preserved, not for immediate release but for a moment yet to come. The idea that Philip may have left behind more than words spoken in passing has only intensified the mystery. Because if this final message exists in a tangible form, then it wasn't simply an emotional farewell. It was intentional, structured, meant to endure. And that changes everything. It suggests that Philip wasn't offering gentle guidance, he was issuing direction. Not vague reflections, but clear, possibly uncompromising instructions. Even those working within the palace reportedly sensed that something was different. There was movement that didn't follow the usual patterns. Conversations that ended abruptly when others approached. A shift in tone, subtle but undeniable. The atmosphere itself carried a kind of quiet urgency, as if everyone understood that something significant was unfolding, but no one fully grasped its scope. And through it all, the silence remained. Not accidental, not circumstantial, but chosen. Carefully maintained even within the inner circles of the monarchy. Because whatever Philip was shaping in those final moments, it wasn't meant to be revealed immediately. It was meant to wait, to surface when the time was right or perhaps when it could no longer be contained. Now with Charles finally speaking, those final days take on an entirely different meaning. They are no longer just the closing chapter of a long life, they become the beginning of something else. Something planned, something intentional, something that was never meant to end with Philip's passing. But what exactly did Philip ask of his son, and why would Charles wait so long to reveal it? When King Charles finally revealed Prince Philip's final wish, it wasn't met with quiet reflection, it triggered shockwaves. Because this wasn't a sentimental goodbye or a gentle request. It was bold. It was unexpected. And for some within the monarchy, it was deeply unsettling. What Charles disclosed suggests that Philip's last words were not about preserving tradition, but about challenging it in ways no one saw coming. The moment itself did not arrive with fanfare or spectacle, but with a weight that made it impossible to ignore. It came at a time when attention was already fixed on the monarchy, when every word spoken by the king carried amplified significance. And yet, even within that heightened atmosphere, no one was prepared for what followed. Charles spoke carefully but not cautiously. There was intention in his tone, a sense that he had crossed an invisible line simply by saying it aloud. Because once those words left his lips, they could not be reshaped, softened, or taken back. At the heart of the revelation was something far more disruptive than anyone expected. Philip's final wish, as described by Charles, was not about continuity, it was about confrontation. It challenged the very framework that had defined the monarchy for generations. It questioned the balance between tradition and relevance, between image and truth. And perhaps most striking of all, it implied that the institution itself needed to evolve in ways it had long resisted. This was not a request for preservation. It was a demand for transformation. That alone would have been enough to stir unease. But the deeper implication was even more unsettling. Because if Philip had truly intended this shift, then it meant he had seen something others refused to acknowledge. It meant he believed the monarchy, in its current form, was at risk not from external forces, but from within. And that belief, now spoken publicly by Charles, created a ripple effect that spread almost instantly through the palace. Inside those walls, the reaction was immediate and intense. Shock was the first response, followed quickly by disbelief. Not because Philip was incapable of such a wish, but because it had been revealed at all. There were those who viewed it as a necessary truth finally brought into the open. Others saw it as a dangerous exposure, one that threatened to destabilize carefully maintained unity. Conversations grew sharper, more urgent. The question was no longer whether the wish existed, but what should be done about it. Outside the palace, the narrative unfolded differently. The public heard the words, but not the full weight behind them. For many, it was a fascinating glimpse into royal dynamics, a story layered with intrigue. But within the monarchy, it was something far more serious. It was a moment of reckoning, a dividing line between those willing to embrace change and those determined to protect tradition at all costs. And at the center of it all stood Charles, not just as king, but as a son carrying the burden of a final request that refused to remain private. His position was impossible to simplify. Loyalty pulled him in one direction, duty pulled him in another. And the deeper he stepped into that conflict, the clearer it became that there was no path forward without consequence. Because fulfilling Philip's wish would not be a quiet act. It would require decisions that could fracture alliances, reshape roles, and redefine the monarchy itself. It would demand courage and risk. And perhaps that was exactly why Philip entrusted it to Charles. Not because it would be easy, but because he believed his son was the only one willing to take that step. And as the implications of this revelation began to unfold, one question became impossible to ignore: who stands to lose the most? Behind the grandeur of royal ceremonies lies a truth rarely seen: division, disagreement, and quiet power struggles. And Philip's final wish has reportedly ignited tensions that were already simmering beneath the surface. For some, it represents necessary change. For others, it threatens the very foundation of the monarchy. And as loyalties begin to shift, the cracks are becoming impossible to hide. What was once contained behind polite smiles and carefully timed appearances has begun to strain under pressure that can no longer be disguised. The revelation did not create division, it exposed it. Within the inner circle, conversations have reportedly grown sharper, no longer wrapped in the usual diplomatic restraint. The question at the center is deceptively simple. Should Philip's final wish be honored without hesitation, or should it be quietly set aside for the sake of stability? But beneath that question lies something far more complicated: fear. Some see the wish as a long overdue correction, a bold step toward preserving relevance in a rapidly changing world. Others see it as a dangerous disruption, one that could unravel decades of carefully maintained order. These opposing views have created invisible lines within the monarchy, separating those willing to embrace uncertainty from those determined to protect what has always been. And once those lines are drawn, they are rarely easy to erase. Among senior members of the royal family, this divide is said to be particularly intense. Not openly declared, not publicly acknowledged, but deeply felt. Conversations that once flowed easily now carry an undercurrent of tension. Words are chosen more carefully. Silences stretch longer. Because everyone understands what is at stake: not just personal reputation, but the future structure of the monarchy itself. There is also the weight of public perception pressing down on every decision. The monarchy has always relied on a delicate balance between transparency and mystery. Too much change too quickly could provoke backlash. But ignoring Philip's final wish carries its own risk, one that feels almost personal. To disregard it would not just be a strategic decision, it would be seen, by some, as a betrayal of his legacy. And that emotional layer makes everything more fragile. This is not simply a political or institutional dilemma, it is deeply human. Family ties are being tested in ways that cannot be easily resolved. Loyalty to each other clashes with loyalty to the crown. And in that collision, there is no clear path that satisfies both. Every choice carries consequences, not just for the monarchy but for the relationships within it. The lingering presence of the Queen's legacy only adds to the complexity. Her reign represented stability, continuity, a sense of unshakable order. To introduce significant change now feels, to some, like stepping away from everything she embodied. And yet, to resist change entirely risks allowing the monarchy to drift further from the world it is meant to serve. That tension between honoring the past and confronting the future hangs over every discussion. Even in public, where unity is expected, subtle shifts are beginning to emerge. A glance held a moment too long. A statement that feels slightly restrained. A silence where clarity should exist. These are not dramatic confrontations, but they are revealing. They suggest that beneath the surface, something is shifting and not everyone is moving in the same direction. The monarchy now finds itself at a crossroads, where every step forward feels uncertain. This is no longer about managing appearances or maintaining tradition without question. It is about deciding what the monarchy is willing to become and what it is willing to risk in order to survive. But this wasn't just about internal conflict, it was about the future of the monarchy itself. For centuries, the British monarchy has survived by adapting, but never like this. Philip's final wish isn't just a personal request, it's a potential turning point. If King Charles chooses to honor it fully, the ripple effects could reshape the monarchy for generations. But change at this scale comes with consequences, and not everyone is ready for what comes next. The monarchy has faced moments of transformation before. each one arriving under pressure, each one testing its ability to survive. There were times when public opinion turned hostile, when relevance was questioned, when the institution itself seemed to stand on uncertain ground. And yet, each time, it adjusted carefully, deliberately never abandoning its core, but reshaping its image just enough to endure. But what makes this moment different is not just the scale of change being suggested, it's the source of it. This is not a reform driven by public demand or external crisis. It is something far more unsettling. It is a shift originating from within, from a figure who spent decades observing the monarchy's strengths and weaknesses from the inside. Philip was not an outsider looking in, he was embedded in its very foundation. And that gives his final wish a kind of authority that cannot be easily dismissed. It forces a confrontation not just with the future, but with the truth of what the monarchy has become. There is a symbolic weight to this that extends far beyond one man's words. Even in death, Philip's influence lingers, not as memory, but as momentum. His final wish has transformed from a private message into something larger, a catalyst that is already beginning to reshape conversations, decisions, and expectations. And the deeper those implications are explored, the clearer it becomes that this is not about minor adjustments. It is about redefining the institution at its core. The changes being implied are not spelled out in simple terms, but they are felt in the tension surrounding them. They suggest a shift in priorities, in structure, in how the monarchy presents itself to the world. A move away from rigid tradition toward something more fluid, more responsive. But that kind of evolution carries risk, because every step toward change is also a step away from something familiar, and for an institution built on continuity, that is a dangerous balance to disrupt. Public reaction reflects that uncertainty. There is fascination, yes, curiosity about what this could mean, about what might come next. But alongside that curiosity is skepticism, a question of whether the monarchy can truly change without losing what defines it, and perhaps most importantly, whether it even should. Because while some see this as progress, others see it as a departure too far. And at the center of it all stands Charles, not just as a king, but as a figure caught between eras. His role is no longer simply to maintain what he inherited. It is to decide what comes after. That places him in a position unlike any monarch before him, a transitional figure, carrying both the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. And the choices he makes now will not just shape his reign, they will determine how the monarchy is remembered. There is a quiet but undeniable truth emerging from all of this. Doing nothing is no longer an option. To resist change entirely risks stagnation, a slow fading into irrelevance. But to embrace it fully risks losing the very identity that has sustained the monarchy for centuries. That tension between preservation and transformation is now impossible to ignore. And as this moment continues to unfold, it becomes increasingly clear that this is not just another chapter in royal history. It is a defining moment, one that will shape not only how the monarchy moves forward, but how it understands itself. Yet beyond politics and tradition, there's something far more personal driving this story. Strip away the titles, the crowns, and the centuries of tradition, and what remains is a son faced with an impossible choice. Honor his father's final wish, or protect the institution he was born to lead. For King Charles, this is more than a royal dilemma, it's deeply personal. And the emotional weight of that decision may be the most powerful force shaping what happens next. Because long before he became king, before the weight of the crown settled onto his shoulders, Charles was simply a son trying to understand a father who was never easy to read. Their relationship was not defined by warmth alone, nor by distance alone, it existed somewhere in between. Shaped by expectation, discipline, and moments of quiet, unspoken respect. Philip was not the kind of father who offered easy reassurance. He believed in strength, in resilience, in pushing forward regardless of doubt. And for Charles, that often meant learning through pressure rather than comfort. There were moments of tension that lingered for years. Differences in personality, in worldview, in how each of them understood the role of the monarchy. Charles, often more reflective, more attuned to emotion. Philip, direct, unwavering, grounded in a belief that duty must come before all else. And yet beneath those differences, there was something deeper, a bond that didn't need constant expression to exist. It revealed itself in small moments, in mutual understanding that surfaced when it mattered most. But as time passed, that relationship began to evolve. The distance softened, not through grand gestures but through shared experience. Charles stepped closer to the responsibilities Philip had carried for decades, and in doing so, began to see the world through his father's eyes. And perhaps Philip saw something change in Charles as well, not just as a son, but as a future king capable of bearing the weight that comes with that role. That is what makes this final wish so significant. Because it wasn't given to just anyone. It was given to Charles. Not as a passing thought, not as a gentle suggestion, but as something intentional. A responsibility placed directly into his hands. And with that responsibility comes a burden that cannot be shared, cannot be divided. It is his alone to carry. The conflict it creates is not abstract. It is deeply personal. On one side is loyalty to his father, a final request that carries emotional weight far beyond its words. On the other is loyalty to the crown, to an institution that demands stability, continuity, and careful preservation. And the two are no longer aligned. To honor one may mean compromising the other. To protect one may mean letting the other fade. And in the quiet moments away from public scrutiny, that conflict does not disappear. It grows. Because grief has a way of sharpening decisions, of making them feel more urgent, more final. Charles is not just navigating a constitutional challenge, he is navigating loss. And that loss shapes how he sees his choices, how he measures their consequences. There is also a loneliness in this position that cannot be ignored. Leadership at this level isolates. The higher the responsibility, the fewer the voices that can truly share its weight. Advisors can guide, family can offer perspective, but the final decision rests with him. And that decision will define not just his reign, but how he is remembered as a son and as a king. And perhaps the most haunting possibility is this, that Philip knew exactly what he was doing, that this final wish was not just about change, but about testing Charles, forcing him to confront the very question he had spent a lifetime preparing to answer. Not whether he could lead, but how he would choose to lead when faced with the impossible. And as the world watches closely, the question remains, what will King Charles actually do? History doesn't wait, and neither does public expectation. As speculation grows and pressure mounts, King Charles stands at a defining moment. Will he honor Prince Philip's final wish no matter the consequences? Or will he choose stability over disruption? The decision he makes won't just impact the monarchy today, it will echo for generations, shaping how history remembers both father and son. The urgency surrounding this moment is no longer subtle, it is pressing, relentless, impossible to delay. What once lingered in quiet discussion has now moved into the open, where every silence is questioned and every gesture is analyzed. Time, which once allowed the monarchy to carefully navigate its challenges, now feels compressed. The longer Charles waits, the louder the speculation becomes. And with each passing day, the expectation for action grows heavier, more demanding, more unforgiving. Outside the palace, the pressure builds from every direction. Media narratives intensify, each one attempting to interpret what this revelation truly means. Public opinion begins to divide, not in extreme confrontation, but in a slow, steady pull in opposite directions. Some call for bold action, seeing this as a moment of necessary evolution. Others urge caution, fearing that too much change could destabilize what has endured for centuries. And as these voices grow louder, they create an environment where inaction feels just as powerful and just as dangerous as any decision. Inside the monarchy, the pressure takes on a different form. It is quieter, but no less intense. Advisors weigh consequences, measuring every possible outcome with calculated precision. Family members, each with their own perspective, add layers of complexity to an already impossible situation. Tradition itself becomes a force unspoken, yet deeply felt, reminding Charles of the expectations that come with the crown. These internal pressures do not demand attention through noise, but through presence. They are constant, unavoidable. Every possible path forward carries its own set of risks. To fully honor Philip's wish could ignite a transformation that reshapes the monarchy in ways no one can fully predict. It could strengthen its relevance or fracture its unity. To resist that wish, to prioritize stability, could preserve order in the short term, but at the cost of ignoring a legacy that now refuses to remain silent. And somewhere between those two extremes lies hesitation, a space where decisions are delayed, where clarity is postponed. But even that space is not without consequence. Because hesitation in moments like this is not neutral. It sends its own message. It suggests uncertainty, doubt, perhaps even fear. And for an institution built on confidence and continuity, that perception alone can begin to erode trust. Action, on the other hand, carries symbolism. It defines leadership. It shapes how authority is understood not just in the present, but in the years that follow. This is why the weight of this decision feels so absolute. It is not just about what Charles chooses to do, but about what that choice represents. Whether he steps forward into change or holds firmly to tradition, he is defining his reign in a way that cannot be undone. This is the moment where leadership is no longer theoretical, it becomes real, visible, undeniable. And beneath it all, there is a growing sense that something irreversible is approaching. That whatever decision is made, it will mark a turning point that cannot be quietly reversed or forgotten. The monarchy will not emerge from this unchanged. The only question is how. But perhaps the most haunting question of all is whether this was Philip's plan all along. What if Prince Philip's final wish was never just about change but about legacy? About forcing the monarchy to confront truths it had long avoided. As the dust begins to settle, one thing becomes clear. This wasn't just a private message between father and son. It was a moment designed to ripple through history, and whether it unites or divides, its impact may be impossible to undo. Because when everything is stripped back, the tension, the debate, the uncertainty, what begins to emerge is something far more deliberate than anyone first imagined. This was not an impulsive request made in the shadow of mortality. It feels calculated, measured, almost as if Philip understood exactly how this would unfold long before his final days arrived. His wish, now revealed, carries the unmistakable weight of intention. Not just to influence Charles, but to challenge the monarchy itself, to confront a version of truth it had carefully avoided for generations. In that sense, this was never just about what needed to change, it was about what needed to be acknowledged. Philip's influence did not end with his passing. If anything, it became more powerful. Freed from the constraints of protocol, from the need to maintain appearances, his final words now move through the institution with a force that cannot be easily contained. They linger in conversations, shape decisions, and cast a shadow over every choice that follows. It is a presence that refuses to fade, because it was never meant to. And yet the monarchy finds itself caught between two forces it cannot reconcile. On one side, the weight of history, centuries of tradition, carefully preserved, fiercely protected. On the other, the undeniable pull of a future that demands adaptation. Philip's final wish sits directly at that intersection, forcing a confrontation that can no longer be postponed. It is not a gentle transition. It is a reckoning, and reckoning always comes with discomfort. There is also something deeply emotional woven into all of this, an undercurrent of unfinished business that refuses to settle. Because final wishes carry a kind of permanence that ordinary words do not. They are remembered differently, interpreted more intensely, and when they remain unresolved, they linger. Not quietly, but persistently. That is what gives this moment its haunting quality. It is not just about what has been revealed, it is about what has yet to be decided. The public, once captivated by the intrigue, is now beginning to watch with a different kind of attention. Curiosity is evolving into scrutiny. Questions are no longer limited to what Philip wanted, they are now focused on what will actually happen. And as that scrutiny deepens, the pressure does not fade. It grows. Because the longer this story continues, the clearer it becomes that it is not a moment, it is a process. One that is still unfolding, still shifting, still unresolved. And perhaps the most unsettling thought of all is this: what if Philip anticipated every part of this? What if the division, the pressure, the impossible choices, what if all of it was expected? Not out of manipulation, but out of understanding, a recognition that real change does not happen quietly. It disrupts, it challenges, it forces those involved to confront who they truly are. If that is the case, then this final wish was never meant to provide answers. It was meant to create them, to push the monarchy into a position where it could no longer remain unchanged. And in doing so, Philip ensured that his influence would extend far beyond his lifetime, not as memory, but as momentum. Because in the end, this is not just about one decision, one revelation, or even one reign. It is about transformation. The kind that cannot be reversed once it begins. And while change may be inevitable, the cost of that change is something no one can fully predict. And as history begins to write its verdict, one truth remains: some final wishes aren't meant to be buried. They're meant to change everything. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.